Thank you. I'm Michael Feeley. I was a police officer for 17 years with two forces here in the UK, in London and in Birmingham in the West Midlands.
Can you explain why you left the police force?
I left the police force because of unrealistic demands, unrealistic political targets. I saw crime figures being manipulated, response figures being manipulated to fool the public. I saw real serious sort of officer safety issues. We were told to stop people who we knew weren't doing anything wrong because that reflected well on the crime figures, to such an extent that myself and my partner and wife now actually stood up and actually said what we feel and actually tell them what we thought of them and the system, to such an extent that they actually tried to split us up and put us on completely different shifts. So not only would we not see each other at work, but neither would we see each other at home either. And that was sort of a childish punishment for speaking out against the system.
What would you say is the main problem with modern policing?
I would say the main problem with modern policing is probably the system, the political system and target-driven system that officers who just want to do a job are faced with. They can no longer have discretion because of force policy, which is enforced by disciplinary action for not following. And there is no discretion anymore. Officers are told before they even turn up to an incident how that incident is going to be dealt with. And I think the main problem with policing now is that system. And also the remit for recruitment is basically recruiting people who are not thinking, who are basically just happy to enforce what they're told to enforce. And that is the same from PC level through to sergeant, through to inspector and beyond.
Okay, so just go for it.
Okay.
Can you explain common law?
Common law to me is basically the law of the land that's been with us since the Magna Carta in 1215. It's basically if you don't hurt anyone, don't steal anything, don't commit a breach of the peace, you haven't breached any common law. It's a simple, easy to understand, common man sort of law. The problem with different laws we have now is no one can understand them, not even the people enforcing them, whether in courts or on the streets. So common law to me is law of the land, which is simple, basic to understand, and it's been with us since the dawn of our age, really.
Can we give some examples of like breaking common law?
Yeah. Some examples of common law: a breach of the peace, which is where violence, injury or damage is likely or has been caused. That is a breach of the peace. Murder, attempted murder, still comes under breach of the peace, which is common law. So if you're reading a charge sheet out to somebody who's murdered someone else, it is contrary to common law, which stands to reason. Again, you have different aspects of law that sort of supersede and overshadow common law. But basically, if you don't hurt anyone, commit any offences, cause a breach of the peace, you haven't breached any common law. It's simple to understand.
And you can basically do what you want as long as you don't break common law.
Yeah? Yes, you can basically do as long as you're not interfering with somebody else's well-being, assaulting them, stealing their property, causing a disturbance. You are not breaching common law.
Excellent. So, you know, as a police officer, you can't actually go up to somebody and demand the details or give them your name or address, or even engage with if they haven't committed a crime. Which is that was correct?
The police can engage with anybody they wish to. There's certain criteria. For argument's sake, if a police officer suspects you of committing an offence, or which is either arrestable or for which they wish to summons report you, i.e. I'm going to report you for going through a red traffic light, then yes, you do have to give your details. Otherwise, you can't be summoned. If that police officer doesn't reasonably suspect you of any of those two criteria, then no. There is also another part of the law which is called an encounter, which means if an officer comes up to you to ask you to account for your whereabouts at a certain time, you still don't have to give your details. The officer will just write a description of who you are. So there's only really two criteria in which you must give your details to a police officer, that being you're suspected of committing a crime or that officer wished to report you for a summonable offence.
So basically, if you're walking down the street and none of these two criteria are not met, you don't have to engage with the police officer. Is that correct?
If those two criteria are not met, then you don't have to engage with that police officer now. And once it becomes law of the land, there's some things that you can be arrested for, there's some things you can be taken to court for civilly. For argument's sake, we all know murder, rape, theft is an arrestable offence, which is law of the land, statute, theft act, and so on. Some things are common law, some things are civil law, such as neighbour disputes, financial disputes between two parties. If a council takes you to court for littering, you get fined by the court. non-payment of that fine is a civil matter, and yet the police are getting dragged into civil matters to become debt collectors. So there are different acts, different sections and different disposal options within statutes, acts, common law and the different variations of law.
So how do you understand that? You know, if I said to you, the statutes and acts are under the consent of the governed, how do you understand that question?
I understand the consent of the governed is basically, and this is this is a misconception that people don't understand. When we go out to vote and we elect a government, we are giving that government our consent. And people seem to think that, well, I don't consent to this law. That's irrelevant. If you go out and vote for a government, that elected government has your authority to legislate against you, how it sees fit. That is governing by consent. We don't vote because we don't consent to many of the laws that the government are coming out. We've drawn our personal consent by not voting for them. But when you vote an elected government or an elected Prime Minister, you are giving them your consent to be governed and legislated against.
Yes. And can you, as far as you know, can you remove that? Can you remove that consent verbally, or does it have to be through a letter?
As far as I'm concerned, by me not voting, that's me. I mean, again, I don't fully know.
Yeah.
I'm still tied up in the intricate web of the system as anybody else. Yeah. If a judge or a police officer comes to me and I say I haven't voted for David Cameron, so therefore I don't recognise your laws, there's only one way that's going, and that's their way.
Yeah. But again, so we're sort of contract, but again, a distinction needs to be made here, I think, again, at this point, that the lawful, that we talk about harm, injury and loss, and the consent, the policing by consent is obviously through the statutes and acts and everything, isn't it? So,
yes.
I mean, there was a big distinction between the law system and the legal system, and even statutes and acts fall under the legal system because they're created by government. So I don't know if you want to... Basically,
common law, you can't really entrap people, you can't really enslave people with common law. It's common sense, it's basic, it's easy to understand. If you wish to control people, you need to make a system that nobody understands, not even judges, not even barristers, not even police officers. Because if we understand it, we can have our say, we can rebel against it. If we don't understand, we're sitting ducks. Basically, as I say, when we give the government our consent to be legislated against, they legislate against us. Whether it's statute law, common law, criminal law, maritime law, they legislate against us. But we have consented to that. And many of the laws that are coming in secretly, they will argue that, well, you voted us in, we can do what we like. And that is pretty much their attitude. You have to have a system that no one understands in order to enslave people. And and we all know, people who've looked into this system deep enough understand the main priority is to control people, control resources, control planet Earth. You can only do that if people don't understand what's going on. And that to me is the crux of the matter. You need to understand, we need to research and stop being ignorant. You know, ignorance is our fault.
Yes.
I heard a saying once that we run the risk of becoming the most informed race or generation to die of ignorance. And that's our fault. We need, and myself and Sarah included, you know, we were ignorant to all this as well. People need to understand what's happening, otherwise we're sitting ducks to it.
And how do you feel that, you know, spending obviously you 16 years, how many years were you? 5. But you 16 years being in there, coming out of it and realising how much of it was in essence a scam. I mean, how does it make you feel?
How does anybody feel when they've been duped? We were involved in a system, and there are many police officers, including us, that try and use discretion, try and use common sense within a system that, again, can discipline you for not following the policy of that system. Yeah. But there are certainly officers, and the more and more officers that become aware, they don't necessarily have to leave, but the more officers that are aware of the system from within, then that discretion will expand, and the way people are treated and the way incidents are dealt with will expand also. The options will expand. We're not happy with some of the things that we did, not happy with some of the things that we were made to do, and that's partly the reason we left. You know, there's not many people that can turn around and say, I didn't agree with it. For A, B and C, we left. We had nothing to go to, and still we said, no, enough's enough. It goes against our integrity. We no longer want to be a part of the system. It's not nice. It's not nice to know you've been duped. It's not nice to know you've actually acted in a way that I would no longer act. But at the time, you know, you act to the best of your belief.